Welcome back to the BDA YouTube channel, where we dive into the most pressing issues shaping life in Miami and the broader Florida community, from urban development to infrastructure and community safety. Today, we're tackling an issue that's gaining more urgency in the world of Florida condominiums, BDA systems, also known as Emergency Responder Communication Enhancement Systems. These systems are a critical safety feature that ensure first responders like firefighters and police can maintain communication inside a building during an emergency. Many property managers and condo board members are still learning about these systems. So, we're here to help unpack what you need to know, what's required, and what happens if your building is not compliant. To help us make sense of it all, we're joined by Will Washburn, CEO of DigitechX Wireless Services. Welcome, Will.
Thank you for having me.
It's really good to have you here. And before we dive into this, let me give Will a proper introduction. You're the CEO of DigitechX Wireless Incorporated, and you are a national provider of cellular and land mobile radio solutions for in-building communications. That includes stadiums, healthcare campuses, hospitality spaces, residential condos, and even transportation hubs. Since founding the company in 2011, you've led the design, engineering, and integration of distributed antenna systems across the country, ensuring seamless communication in buildings where it matters most. Now, you're also a serial entrepreneur, Will. You've owned and operated more than 20 companies over the past 40 years, and you don't look that old. So when did you start? When you were 12? But your team brings over 60 years of combined telecom experience, making DigitechX a leading player in emergency communications infrastructure. So, Will, let's dive into this topic and start really at the basic level. What is a BDA and where did this requirement evolve from?
Great question. BDA is Bi-Directional Amplifier. And what it does is it amplifies in-building macro systems like municipalities, like the city of Miami, and it enhances radio coverage indoors. Unfortunately, building densities block RF coverage, so when they come into a building, in many cases, their radio system is challenged. So this system, we place a donor antenna on the roof to communicate with their macro tower, and we put distributed antennas throughout the building so that when they come in, it's seamless coverage and they can continue to communicate on the radios.
So is this a requirement for all buildings, both national and local?
Yeah, this started it started with National Fire Protection Agency and International Fire Code back in the early 2000s, and really caught fire in 2009. And so it's a national initiative, but it's left up to the local authorities having jurisdiction. And in this case, it's the city of Miami.
So, so the city of Miami dictates when buildings have to be compliant.
Correct. So the state legislation that was passed in 2016 stated that all buildings would be compliant with emergency responder radio communications if they didn't have adequate coverage. And that mandate is for existing and new constructions. The only state in the union that actually mandated this for existing structures. Most other AHJs, which are authority having jurisdictions, only require new construction. So
is there a date, Will, that all buildings have to be compliant by?
Yes, it was January 1, 2025, which
is
passed.
So the date has passed.
Yes, it has.
Wow. And as president of the Biscayne Neighborhoods Associations, I do get an opportunity to talk to a lot of the property managers and board members of these buildings. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm sure some buildings are not compliant with this. And part of the reason is many properties right now are experiencing heavy capital outlays, right, for increased insurance premiums, the SIRS that has come up now, and there's recertification, right, for older buildings that require big restoration budgets. So this would be another cost, and so let's touch on what happens if a building is not compliant, and really what kind of cost are we talking about to implement the system?
Sure. Well, the enforcement is left to the authority having jurisdiction. And just to be clear, City of Miami has their own radio system. The county has their own radio system, which is separate. Miami Beach has their own radio system. Fort Lauderdale has their own radio system. So it's up to the AHJ that enforces this. Currently, the City of Miami and Miami-Dade County have taken the position of, hey, we've got to cover 956 buildings in South Florida. And this is not going to happen overnight. So they've taken a laissez-faire attitude and saying, hey, if you're moving towards a solution and hiring a contractor and getting into permit, they're going to leave you alone until you get remediated. However, there are some jurisdictions like Hollywood, Florida, that are actively fining individuals and property not having the system remediated. So I would guess that if we looked at the holistic view of South Florida, there's probably only 20% that have actually remediated this.
Wow. So before we even get deeper, I want to give our audience an opportunity to really understand what it is that we're talking about. So let's say I own a condo in a building in South Florida. Can you describe a situation where an emergency occurs and if the communication is not up to par? I mean, I don't think we've had anything crazy. Maybe there is a story you could share with us that something might have happened. But perhaps if there is a short story, that would be great. But if not, can you give us a scenario that would help me understand, just as a condo owner in South Florida, hey, if my building doesn't have this, what's the downside?
Yeah, and look, these are heroic people that rush into these properties when there's an emergency, and they
And when we're
need
talking about emergency, we're talking fire, right? Is that the main one?
fire, or let's say somebody had a heart attack and they have to get up, an emergency responder has to get up on a high floor to, they need communications.
Or whether it's a hurricane.
Yeah, or a hurricane.
So it's basically first responders entering a building where they need to be able to communicate.
Sure, a perfect example was the World Trade, and most of those firefighters that got into trouble in that scenario were they had no communication, and a lot of this stemmed from that particular incident. So back in 2000, and the International Fire Code wrote Section 510, and that's how this really emanated throughout the country as a national initiative. They left it up to the authorities having jurisdiction for enforcement, and I think that's an important topic to discuss. You said, hey, all these budgets have to be allocated for all these properties to be mitigated. And there was never any community outreach that said, hey, in 2016, we passed this law, your building's going to have to be compliant, start to get the budget together. So a lot of it was education. And we did a lot of education, holding seminars and speaking to associations to talk about what it is, what you're going to have to budget. But these budgets for a mitigation of a high rise are anywhere between 33 cents and 50 cents a foot. So it's a significant item.
Wow. So this is a huge safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if I'm sleeping at night at 2:00 in the morning in my condo, an emergency occurs, you're saying the firefighters need to communicate with who and how?
So they need to be able to communicate. It's not a peer-to-peer system. Every transmission, uplink and downlink goes through the macro tower, through the central office and back out. So if you're in a building and you have an associate on another floor, your radios aren't communicating together. They go out to the macro and back out. So if they're going to have clear communication in the building, they have to have signal inside the building. And most of it is in the critical areas, stairwells, elevator hoistways, pump rooms, areas like that.
So the first responders need to be able to communicate with each other to better help the residents to safety.
Absolutely.
Great. I think that gives everyone even a more clear understanding. So now let's go back again. I want to take this from the point of view right now of the um, condo owner. How do I know? So I live there. I'm not on the board. I'm not really involved in my building. So again, just as a condo owner, how do I know if my building is compliant?
Right, that's a discussion, the board is making decisions whether to remediate this or not. It's a topic of discussion at the next board meeting. It's very
So
important.
it's up to residents to bring it up to their board and say, hey, are we compliant with this?
Correct. Let me share with you an example. In 2019, a lot of early adopters in the commercial space were moving. We remediated the Southeast Financial Center, the Epic Hotel, 701 Brickell, 801 Brickell, and then COVID happened. And we had a pipeline of commercial properties to build, and Senator Hooper introduced the bill to push the compliance date from 21 to 25.
Because of COVID.
Yes. And all the commercial properties put this into a later budget. Residential properties took a different attitude. They felt that there was serious liability if they didn't comply and are actually moving faster. So on the remediation. But you're absolutely right. It's a safety measure. It is to protect the heroes that come into these buildings in an event of a fire or a hurricane or some tragic event. And it also helps to secure safety for the residents, because those responders are there for a reason and they need to communicate.
They need to communicate. I mean, again, I talk to many condo owners, and they one of the things everybody complains about is the poor cell service.
Yes.
Right? Especially if you get on a higher floor, unless you go out to your balcony or, there's a certain spot. But calls are consistently dropping in condos. And I think a lot has to do with what you said, the glass, the impact glass, which is there for safety reasons from hurricanes. But then it's created a consequence of not being able to communicate clearly. So let's say a building decides to move forward and say, hey, yeah, we need a system like this involved. I mean, are there like visible antennas on top of the building, or like, does their cell service improve?
No, unfortunately, it's a separate band.
Okay.
We're talking about land mobile radio. It's usually in the either 450 or the 800 or 700 megahertz frequencies, whereas your cell frequencies are up in the 1900, 2100 AWS band and so forth. They're completely different technologies. And that's one of the wish lists.
Okay.
That will this improve our cellular? And the answer is no.
No, it does not, unfortunately, because I know a lot of people have cell boosters that they put in to get better signal inside their units and inside the buildings. So I think perhaps, again, I think you gave technical ways. How would you simply share what's the difference between a BDA system and maybe a cell booster?
Yeah, a BDA system's going to be focused on enhancing the channels for the local authority having jurisdiction, and those channels only. And it's in this market, it's a Class B or a wideband repeater, and it's just going to be amplifying all of those channels within that range. A cellular booster is something that would specifically enhance AT&T, T-Mobile's, and Verizon's channels, which are in the higher bands. But when you look at what it takes to get this done, we have to put a donor antenna on the roof, and we have to distribute antennas in the areas only that need coverage. Because if that donor antenna, if that signal leaks outside the building, we have problems. The system goes into oscillation, and it can knock out the entire city's ability to use their radios. So we generally put antennas in the stairwells, in the elevator hoistways, and in the common areas that don't pass.
Okay. So, and if we take Brickell, we take downtown Miami, we take Edgewater, there are a lot of high rises that already exist there, and a lot new ones coming up.
Sure.
And now buildings are very close to each other. Is there any way buildings can collaborate to share systems, or does every building have to have their own?
Yes, it's called a fiber DAS, where a group of buildings can have one donor antenna and share the system through remotes. And it's connected via fiber optic cable. And yes, that's very prominent. And sometimes the jurisdictions require it. For instance, on Brickell Key, we're building mini pods of fiber DAS because the buildings are so close together, they could potentially create interference with each other. So if they're on one
Wow.
system, they
It makes it a
reduce
lot
the
easier.
amount of interference that they could create.
So could this be a cost savings if some buildings got together, let's say 3 buildings that are close to each other, different HOAs,
Mhm.
so they said, hey, would that be a cost savings as opposed to them doing it themselves?
Certainly.
it's-
Absolutely, because you would have one donor antenna, say, for 3 or 4 buildings. And that donor antenna is a line item that costs between $75,000 and $100,000 because it has to be 2-hour rated all the way to the roof. So if you have one donor antenna and all share in that donor antenna, there's significant cost savings.
So this is where board members and property managers of buildings need to get together and perhaps have a discussion on this.
Certainly.
And I know one of the things we've talked about is maybe doing webinars for property managers, so they can get insight and perhaps they can go to their board and even give them more information and see where this takes us. So we're get close to wrapping up. I think we've given the public quite a bit of information. Is there any comments you would like to make before I close it out here?
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that you need an assessment of your building to determine where your coverage is good and where it's bad. In some cases, we've got buildings exempt because they passed. So it all starts with a signal survey, and that survey must be completed before you can move forward on any project anyways, and has to be submitted to the HJ. So I think that building owners need to assess what their current state is and whether they have to remediate this or not.
Great. Well, thank you so much for helping us understand this critical topic. It's clear BDA systems are not just another checkbox. They're essential to protecting lives and keeping our communities safe during emergencies. For Miami condo owners, property managers, and board members, knowing your building status and planning ahead could make all the difference. If you're unsure whether your building is compliant or need help navigating the process, reach out to experts like Will and his team at DigitechX Wireless. They're here to guide you from start to finish. And quickly, their website is www.digitechx.com.
Correct.
And you also have a local office here in Miami.
We do.
Great. So, folks, if you found today's episode helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss upcoming conversations on everything from inspections to infrastructure and public safety. Thank you for joining us on the Biscayne Neighborhood Association channel, where we advocate for Edgewater, Midtown, and all of Miami's thriving neighborhoods. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.